it's your gig, man. I'm just on board for you.
Hey everybody, in this dose of performance anxiety, we talk with Kira Roessler. We have a scuba adventure, we talk about Black Flag, and how is she connected to Game of Thrones. Give us a follow at PerformanceANX on Twitter and Instagram, and don't forget to buy things from us at performanceanx.threadless.com. Rate and review every show, subscribe, it really helps us out. So enjoy Kira Roessler.
Hey, it's Kira. I'm a bass player on Performance Anxiety.
All right. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on. This is really cool to have. I'm not really well versed in punk, so this will be more of a learning show for me. So I really do appreciate any knowledge you give me.
Right. Well, I don't know if I am either. I certainly have my ideas, but then other people have their ideas.
But not everybody lived through it like you did, so I'm really happy to talk with you.
Okay, well, we'll give it a try.
All right, perfect. So you started in music at the age of 6, right? And that's you started playing piano.
Yes, I started on piano. I played piano from 6 to 11, classical piano. My brother and I both studied. I have an older brother, 3 years older.
Paul, right?
Right. He and I both studied piano. And then I quit because I couldn't keep up with him because he was 3 years older and I'm miserably competitive. And then after taking a couple years off, he was in this sort of prog rock band that needed a bass player. And so I started practicing really hard because I figured if I could play with him, it would be different than trying to compete with him.
Ah, okay.
And by the time I was, anywhere good enough to, and not really good enough to be in his prog rock band, he had sort of moved on to punk rock, which didn't require quite the level of musicianship. So it was all good.
So is that what drew you to punk, the simplicity of the music?
No, I mean, I followed my brother into many things. It was really he had some friends, he had a couple friends he went to high school with who formed a band called the Germs.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And we went and saw the first gig I went to, we went and saw them at the Whiskey in Hollywood and followed them in, and I tagged along. And then we lived in this sort of crash pad and had a garage in the back and, would practice and had created our own punk rock band and did gigs, So I think that more than the simplicity, it wasn't arena rock, it was like club rock and like accessible in terms of you could start a band and you could try to, play in a club and it wasn't like you had a rock star.
Okay. And afterwards you're at the show and the band is still hanging out at the show.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Because that was one thing I always liked about going to smaller clubs and still do actually, is because after the show, if you like the band, they're usually hanging out at the bar for an hour or so or breaking down and they're almost accessible. You can actually talk to them. You go to a big arena rock show, you can't see them at all.
Absolutely. Ideally, if they're not totally antisocial, you can actually talk to them or get an autograph or, whatever it is that your interest is.
Did you grow up in a musical family since both you and your brother have made careers out of music?
My parents were not musicians at all.
Okay. So what did I know your dad was creative though. He was a photographer, right?
He started, he worked at IBM in the early days of computers, like when they were as big as a room and could do like Pong.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool, because eventually I followed him into that field for a while. But then when I was 8 years old, he said, screw the corporate world and took the family to the Caribbean to become an underwater photographer.
Wow.
And then after we were there for a few years, he had met a guy down there who ran scuba diving tours all over the world. And he came back to help run and eventually run a company in San Francisco that ran scuba diving tours all over the world for years and years.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. See, I'm a photographer by schooling myself, so that to me is awesome. I love that.
So Kira Roessler, you should look him up. He's all over the internet. He has a website with all his more recently doing a lot of like drone photography. Also has his underwater photography on his website from various locations. So,
man, I will definitely check that out.
Yeah, he's very accessible. So
how did you come back to mainland U.S.?
How?
Yeah, what you, after okay, well, that is a great answer. What drew you back as far as if you was it coming back with your dad to go back to California?
Yeah. I mean, I was 11, so it was not up to me. My parents moved us back and we moved to San Francisco, and I was going to go to junior high.
Okay, so you were still young when you guys came back.
Yes, okay. Yes. From 8 till 11, I lived in the Caribbean. And I went to school in Dutch, which is the language there. And I scuba dived in the afternoons, most afternoons.
Oh, my God.
And then we moved to San Francisco, suburbs of San Francisco for a couple of years. And then my parents got divorced, and my mom and I moved to LA.
Okay. And then you started playing bass, and you got into your first band called Wax, right?
That's right. When I was 16, I was living at that crash pad I was talking about. Mom had moved away, and Paul and I were living at this crash pad. We started a band called Wax. And I was Candy Cane.
Oh, man.
So this would be 77.
Okay. That sounds about right for that time. So, and then your first gig was at the Whiskey A Go-Go, right?
You know everything. What do you need me for?
Well, because it's better to hear it in your voice.
Okay, yeah, I played the Whiskey. My first gig was like a Sunday afternoon.
That's a pretty amazing place to play your first gig. At least very historic.
Well, it was like Rodney Binghamheimer. He had a radio show where he was doing some punk rock bands. So he had booking capabilities on Sundays at the Whiskey.
Were there a lot of places booking punk back in that time? No.
I mean, there was really only one consistent place for the first few years, which was this hole in the basement underneath the Pussycat Theater on Hollywood Boulevard called The Mask.
Okay.
The Whiskey would have gigs, and then they would say, no more punk rock. And then they would do it again. The Starwood, same thing. They would sometimes do it, sometimes not. Occasionally, the band, place called the Roxy would do it, but very few places. And they always end up accusing the punkers of trashing the place, and then would stop doing it. There would be gigs at halls, like a special, rent out a hall and a PA system and doing it that way, but nothing consistent.
Who were your early influences at that time? I mean, since punk was just brand new, who were you listening to?
I had favorite bands. I don't know if they were influences, because I always say this. I don't really understand the idea of people having influences who are like bass player influences, for example, because my influences were always the people I was playing with. Because, a bass player is about like doing what's right for the situation you're in, right? It doesn't matter if I want to sound like, Jaco Pastorius, but I'm in a punk rock band, so it doesn't matter if that's my, so anyway, but I had favorite bands. I liked the Screamers, which my brother eventually joined as, we're the only keyboard punk rock band, and he played keyboards. So eventually joined, that band. So I did Wax, and then the guitar player from Wax and I had a band called The Visitors, which had the singer who had been in a Devo video.
Oh, wow.
His claim to fame. And we got some gigs. We opened for Devo because of that. And then,
that's really cool.
And then we had a band called The Monsters who never played because we had the drummer who had been in the Weirdos, and he refused to play any gigs unless we could headline the Whiskey, which of course we couldn't.
Oh my gosh. Jeez.
So we never played any gigs. And I had an all-girl band, or I attempted to have an all-girl band that was called Sex Sick.
Okay. I heard now I was doing a little research for the show. I found a video on YouTube that was called Kira's List. And it's supposedly has a couple Sex Sick songs on it.
I believe that.
I like them.
List.
I like them. Yeah, it's I just typed in your name and interview because I wanted to find a little more information out, and that's one of the first things that popped up. And it's got a couple live tracks from I think '85 from Black Flag, a couple things from Sex Sick, a couple songs from Dose, and some other stuff, and I think some other stuff you did with Mike Watt. But in listening to the two tracks that Sex Sick has on that tape, that's really good. To me, it doesn't sound like punk. It sounds a little more rock.
Well, see, here's the thing as we go back to this idea of what is punk. In the original sort of idea, it wasn't like, oh, you have to play really hard and fast and scream, it wasn't like that.
Okay.
It was like, it just was like do your own thing. I mean, a lot of the punk rock bands were totally just rock. Like, look at the Ramones.
Yeah.
I mean, I always thought they were way too just plain rock to even call them anything different. Personally, nothing against that, but right. I mean, and the Weirdos were very kind of straight rock band. Yeah, I mean, so it had to do with a bit of a look. It had to do with a bit of an attitude and politics, but most of all, it had to do with sort of the established what music was, which was disco and arena rock,
Okay.
And so, I never have felt constrained. Like, I think Dose is incredibly punk rock because there's nothing like it, really.
That's true.
So to my mind, it was, let's face it, when I go to write a song, I'm going to be influenced by my background, just as you're going to be influenced yours and someone else's. You have what you have. I came from listening to some rock, some, Bowie or the Stones or whatever, like, classical, jazz. You have the things that brought you to this place, and then you're influenced by that. So, yeah, I mean, those songs were written by myself and the guitar player, and we loved Black Flag. By the end of Sex Sick, I don't remember what songs were on Kira's list.
I'm trying to remember. I can't. I
doesn't matter. Actually, there's two songs that were Sex Sick songs that I brought to Black Flag, and Henry wrote words to. In the later part of in my head record, I think on Black Flag there is. The music is written by me, and those songs were Sex Sick songs. But anyway, Sex Sick never put out a record. We played very few gigs. We mostly just practiced. And it's because girls are girls.
Yeah.
It's why I didn't like playing in girl band, and that was my one and only attempt to have a girl band.
So you go from Sex Sick, The Visitors, The Monsters, and then
Twisted Roots was my brother's band, and I played in 3 incarnations of that and was kicked out of every single one by my brother.
Oh my gosh. Why were you getting kicked out all the time?
See, it's not really his fault, because what would happen is like the drummer or somebody would go like, well, I don't want to play with her anymore. And then like Paul would go like, yeah, I have a really good drummer, Kira, and they're hard to find, you know? And then sure enough, because people are people, the truth is they didn't want to play in the band anymore. And they didn't think Paul would throw me out. So Paul would throw me out and then they wouldn't want to play anymore anyway. And he'd end up, you know, back where he started with.
Oh, geez.
Anyway, I finally decided I was going to get off that train.
Man, well, hopefully Paul learned his lesson with that eventually, but.
You know, it took a while before Paul and I came to a place where, you know, he's my big brother. So he always was like kind of I have this figured out more than you know, because I'm the big brother.
Right. I'm the big brother. So I know that too.
He's he is 100% respectful of my perspective. We've done like 2 albums worth of my solo stuff, which will never get released, but we like working together. He appreciates my, you know, sensibility. So it's all good now, you know.
Oh, I understand that. I'm the oldest of 3, so I was the Paul in with my brother and sister. So I completely understand that perspective.
Torturing. No.
Yeah. So you eventually made it into Black Flag. How did you meet up with them and how did you get that gig?
All right. So meanwhile, I'm in UCLA studying economics and computers, just to give you that perspective.
Okay.
So so Black Flag's my favorite band. And at a certain point for like 6 months, I dated Henry, and my friend who was also in Sexic, was dating their drummer, Chuck Biscuits.
Okay.
Which is how I met Henry in person. So like after we had broken up and at some point he called me, I was basically just going to school. I don't think I was in a band at that time. He called me and oh, no, that's not true. I was playing in DC3 for like a couple months. And that's Dez's band, Dez Cadena with guitar. And it was going to be a power trio. It was going to be me and Dez and this drummer. And we were practicing at the same place as Black Flag did. So Henry calls me and he says, do you want to stay after, you know, we're Black Flag kicked Chuck out. Do you want to stay after and try out for Black Flag?
Wow.
You know, there won't be anything between us.
Right.
And I'm like, I got it. So I go, I hang around after DC3 practice and they don't seem to know anything about it, but they're like, God. Oh, okay, yeah, we can jam.
Oh, geez.
So that was awkward.
I was about to say that had to be a little awkward.
But we jam. And I said, well, you know, I'm in UCLA and I'm like 3 years in and, you know, I want to finish, but I'm willing to take quarters off to tour, you know. So we talked out some basic logistical stuff about that, about touring and about me trying to finish school. And they said they'd work around my schedule. And that was that. That was my tryout, was a jam.
So at this point,
some of the songs, like there's a record called Process of Weeding Out, and there's some jam type songs, and it's the kind of material that we jammed on. Okay. So at this point, how big is Black Flag, or how well known are they? Well, see, that's the thing. It's very hard to have perspective now because punk rock in general and Black Flag, nobody knows anything about this. Very an underground thing.
Right.
Like now it's kind of infamous, but back then it was like nobody cared.
Okay.
So it was like, you know, Sexic or, you know, it was maybe a little bigger. Like I always measured it by they could like sell out the whiskey.
Okay.
The whiskey's like 300, 400 people. You know, we're not talking about thousands of people.
Right. Because it's not arena rock.
It's not. Well, but not only is it attitude it's not. You couldn't draw that many.
Right. And so they ask you to play and they're willing to work around your school schedule. And you're not studying like, you know, general studies or English. You're studying economics.
Applied math, economics, and computers. It was really hard.
God, so you're studying those pretty serious, impressive subjects, and touring with a band, recording. I don't know how you didn't drop from exhaustion just listening to you. I'm tired.
Well, I took quarters off when we toured, but oftentimes they would literally be dropping me off at UCLA to go to my first day of classes.
Oh my gosh.
And inevitably when we were recording, I would have like a midterm, right after.
Jeez.
So while we're recording, we do these 48-hour lockouts. Do you know what that means?
No. Can you explain that to me?
So you to save money, you pay for 48 hours in the studio, and you just have to play as much as you possibly can and record the whole record, or do as much. So we would record till we dropped, and then during the drop, then I would study because I had a midterm coming.
I would do something similar in college when I was studying photography. You'd have to book studio and darkroom time. This is early 90s. You'd have to book studio and darkroom time to get your projects done. And by the end of the quarter, you're booking as much time. And I literally spent 18 hours in a darkroom and taking little naps while I'm working on my project. So, okay, that makes sense to me. I know where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, it was difficult, and there were classes I didn't do that well on. But luckily by the time I was 3 years in, my schedule wasn't. It did take me, the whole 2 more years that I was in Black Flag to do my last year because I was taking quarters off to tour. So my schedule wasn't too ridiculous, but I did suffer. Because I had to go to in order to pass, I was not a math wizard. To go to pass, I would have to go to all the office hours and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway. And we practiced for 5 hours a day when we were in town.
Gosh.
So I had to go to school, I had to practice for 5 hours, and I had to study,
I read that almost immediately after you joined Black Flag, you actually injured, what was it? You had an arm injury, a wrist injury or something like that? Was that correct? That
was the first, within 3 days. It was gosh. It was not an injury. I hurt myself playing. Basically, the tendon in my right hand. It was one particular move. I heard this kind of pop, and
oh god!
I went to UCLA, and they were like, "Yeah, you should probably not play for 6 weeks." And they all laughed at me that I had done this playing bass. I put it in this little splint, and they said, "You shouldn't play for 6 weeks." But I had just joined Black Flag, and I was a girl.
Yeah, you couldn't not play.
And then not play for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So they were really cool about it. They were like, "Hey, if you need to take time off," but I couldn't do it. Like I told you the part about how it's really competitive.
Yep.
Yeah.
So did that
hand's never really been the same.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Has that affected how you played from then on, or is it something that recovered in your? It did
affect how I played, but my dexterity in my right hand. I'm left-handed, and like an idiot, I play right-handed. So my right hand is definitely lacks some dexterity.
So touring with Black Flag, I've heard some stories about how intense that was, and because of the DIY ethos and the fact that they're not like you were saying, they're not a huge band. You guys had to do everything yourself. How hard was it? Because I imagine driving around with Henry can get pretty intense.
Driving around with Henry is not the thing that makes touring intense, to be clear. First of all, after the first tour I did, which was just one of several, we started carrying our own PA system, which added a lot of expense and added a lot of work because we're now loading in and out a whole PA system. But you'd go to these halls and they'd have this tiny little piece of shit PA system, and you'd have like hundreds of people who'd show up and they wouldn't be able to hear Henry singing. And so it was just bullshit. Yeah. So we just, so that was something that made it really hard. And it added hours because it took us hours to load it out. And then we have to drive and then we have to load it in. So we were getting 4 hours sleep, maybe less. We might have to leave that night depending on how long the drive was. Wow. And just rotate drivers, and try to get some rest. So it was mostly lack of sleep, carrying stuff, playing 2 hours a night, so that your body's just undergoing. It's kind of like, think of it like training for the Olympics. Okay. It's just really, it's kind of physically just grueling. And it wasn't, personality wise, like we all were very business-like. There wasn't bickering. There wasn't, it was just wasn't like that. Henry kept to himself. I kept to myself. Everyone kept to themselves, and in a positive way, just like, because we were tired and irritable and, it was business,
Right. Okay. Now I've heard about touring, like I said, punk touring. It's fairly aggressive as they got to become an more established genre, it appears to be, to me, as an outsider not knowing tons and tons about punk, to be an aggressive style of music. And Henry has mentioned stories and interviews that I've seen with him over the years about some aggression towards the band and towards him in particular. Did you experience anything like that, or was that mainly since he was the front man that was more of
well, he certainly took the brunt of it, no doubt. And I didn't experience it as much as in the tour before, the European tour before we went to Europe. It was really bad. See, the problem is audiences had this expectation of them sounding this certain way, looking this certain way, right? And inevitably, you're not doing it right. And so the people get pissed off. It's like, you don't look punk enough. You're not, playing those songs. You're playing these songs. You know, so in Europe was the worst. Like, I had a full beer can dropped on my head.
Oh, gosh.
Manchester throwing folding chairs. And then in Scotland, Glasgow, they were spitting on us. And to the point where Greg went behind his amp and I just faced my amp, but Henry stood there and took it. Oh, and then afterwards, we're standing outside, loading up our shit. And the guys were like, "Oh, that was really cool." And we're like, "Well, I don't know when you were spitting on us."
Oh,
my God. Well, that's what we do, man. That's punk, And we're like, "Well, we'll see you in 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, that's so gross. That's disgusting.
But you see what I mean? Like, part of it is just this idea of like, this is what punk is. And Henry did take the brunt of that kind of behavior of like, slam into you, jump up on the stage and then leap off and kick him in the face with their boots.
Yes. Oh, gosh. Now, the last album that you were on with Black Flag, that album is a little bit different, and the songs are a bit longer, maybe a little slower. Was that a direct result of stuff like that? People having a certain expectation of punk at this point, and now since punk is all about anti-authoritarianism, anti-establishment, now there's an establishment of the punk sound, and you may be rebelling against that. Or am I just thinking too much into it?
So I think you have the order wrong. It's really, right when I joined, the record, right as I had joined, which had already been recorded, called My War, had some really slow songs on the second side.
Okay.
And that was actually one of those songs that I hurt my hand on.
Oh, geez.
Because they're really heavy, and the style of the sort of heavy, slower play was something, that I think, I wouldn't say it was a reaction to like, we don't want to be predictable, but it was a sensibility of Greg wanting to do, to expand for his own sake.
Right.
in his own sense of style and heaviness to our sensibility, playing heavy, dirgy, stuff did not, by definition, not mean punk. It was angry. It was hostile. It was,
right.
Had all of this emotion to it. To me, it's about what is it expressing,
Okay.
So that album had probably the most of those, these three. Side two is three long, slow songs.
Yeah.
And after that, I would say there were less of those types of songs. There certainly weren't the sort of fast, hard, the fast, screamy kind of songs.
Okay. And I was actually listening to In My Head just a little bit before connecting with you tonight, and I hear a little bit of almost maybe a heavy metal influence in Greg's playing at that point. Was he listening to a lot of that to get those influences? Was that on purpose?
Greg was listening to Grateful Dead and stuff. He listened to all sorts of stuff. But I think in terms of playing, it's In My Head, in my opinion, is one of the coolest records because the way it evolved was different than the other records.
Oh, that's
like with Process of Weeding Out, we used to do these jams, right, where it would be like this riff, and we'd all play the riff over and over, and then Greg would solo and stuff like that. And In My Head started out like that kind of record. It was instrumentals. Greg didn't write lyrics.
Okay.
And Henry would sit and practice and listen to us jam on those, and he wrote lyrics.
Oh, cool.
So most of the songs have been written for music and lyrics together to work together, and those were several of them were written more as these sort of kind of repeating, driving riffs with Henry coming up with lyrics. So I always like when a singer writes their own lyrics because they feel them a bit more. And I always felt like there's some stuff In My Head that you can just tell Henry's digging into in a way that only there are definitely songs earlier that he felt in that deep way, but there's several In My Head that you could just tell are coming right from his gut.
Yeah. So how did things end with Black Flag?
They don't want to play with you anymore. Actually, it was Chuck, who was still working for Black Flag, and kind of managing, who takes me, away from the practice pad and says, "I don't want to play with you anymore."
Oh, wow.
At the end of the 1985 tour. And I kind of knew, because I knew they were scheduling a tour on top of my last quarter of school. So I had found out this fact. So I wasn't blindsided, but anyway.
Okay.
It was just that simple. And he tried, I said, I'd like to take this amp, and, we made arrangements such as they were, and went our separate ways.
Since I don't exactly know how this happened, I might be jumping around a little bit here. You're actually currently a dialogue editor and for theatrical films and shows. You also play with Mike Watt in the band Dose.
Yeah.
Now, how far in between what you're doing now and a Black Flag did you start doing dialogue editing and getting into that? Was it immediately after, or was it did it take time?
No. So the order goes, I knew Mike, and I started Dose with him pretty close after being out of Black Flag.
Okay.
Because I knew him, and we started dating and eventually married. I had studied computers, like I told you, in school. So my first sort of regular gig was, I actually moved to New Haven for a year because my dad got me hired at New Haven computer department.
Okay.
And I worked in computer programming for 11 years before I changed careers and got into post-production sound.
Okay, and that's in between. Well, while you're in the programming, you're demoing songs with Mike Watt, and he's out. So is he still out in California, and you're in Connecticut at this point?
I was only at Yale for 1 year.
Okay.
And then I came back. And during that time, we sent tapes back and forth, figured out our first record. I flew out to California and we recorded our first record. So Dose was going on while I was gone. And when I got back, and has been going on for 30 plus years.
Well, I listened to that first album and I love it. It sounds like it could have come out yesterday.
Well, the funny thing about the first record is that many of those songs were things I wrote. I did this thing when I was going to New Haven. I was going to be away from my nephews, and I had these bedtime stories that I would read, and I would write little noodling bass lines because I thought it was warm and calming, and I would make these story tapes to give to my nephews so they wouldn't forget my voice.
Oh, wow.
Broke their eggshells one hot summer day and poked their way up through the warm sand in which the eggs had been buried. They looked almost as much alike as so many raindrops. The mother turtle, who was sunning herself on the bank nearby.
So that's
some of them started.
Okay,
the ones that are like animals, like the tortoise and the porcupine.
Oh yeah, and the slow little turtle.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
that.
Those started as these just sort of noodling bass lines to support these stories for my nephews.
Oh, okay, that makes sense because they're so sweet and they're beautiful. I love them. And on that Kira's tape that I saw on YouTube, there's also a demo of the Three Little Pigs, which was really interesting. I appreciate you doing that because there's new information in there for me. I always thought that the story ended after the wolf couldn't blow down the brick house. I didn't realize that there was other stuff involved, like going to an orchard and going to the market, and then it all ends up in a milk jug. So that's all new information for me. So I really feel like my eyes have been opened on that. So thank you.
So I became so eventually, after 11 years of computer programming, I met this guy who my brother was actually composing for a small student film, and he was doing post sound for the film, and they had me come record some bass. And so he had a little sound house, and I started working for him doing low budget movies, starting to work in dialogue, because it turns out dialogue is a very kind of girl-oriented thing. Sound effects is very boy-oriented.
Okay. Well, yeah, there's a lot of explosions and stuff. So
cars, guns.
Yeah. Yeah. Dialogue is dialogue.
Dialogue is detailed and painstaking.
And people talking to each other, which guys aren't good at.
Slowly, I can say that my career has gone very well. It's very demanding. It takes up a lot of time. It makes it hard for me to balance. Sometimes I have time between gigs. Sometimes I don't. The gigs, my hours are intense. So, there's a price to pay. But
so how does it work? How does dialogue editing work? What are you actually doing?
Right? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Right? So what happens is they record on set, but when they record on set, they do they do this scene, this take, they do like 8 takes from this angle. And then on this scene, on another angle, they do a wide shot, they do a 2 shot, they do close-ups, right? So they do all just for one scene. They might do like 20 different angles. God. And then like 8 takes of each, right?
Oh,
so you have all this material that the client, the directors has recorded on the set. And they go into the editing bay with the picture editor who chops it all up and creates a scene. And it comes to me, it's all chopped up.
Okay.
And it sounds like, badly. You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't think it sounded like one scene at all. So it's my job to make it smooth it out, solve problems. I consider it like, how many problems can I solve before the mix?
Okay.
And then the mix comes, and the mixer then makes it sound better still.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. That's, man, and you worked on some amazing projects. Like, you actually you part of an Oscar-winning team for Mad Max Fury Road.
Yep.
You've worked on, let's see, Twilight. And you're working on Game of Thrones. So
season 2, I did Game of Thrones. Yes,
that's fantastic. I mean, I
worked on Star is Born last year.
Really?
And
Oh man! So what projects are you working on currently that you can tell us about?
I'm gonna hold back on the current one. We'll just say that it's really, really cool and exciting.
All right, excellent. Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about it. Once it's released, you can say, "Hey, that was me."
Sure.
Well, I don't.
But yeah, last year it was Aquaman and Star is Born back to back was a huge year. It was like, 9-month projects back to back. It was intense and a lot of work and a lot of hours, but both very rewarding projects.
In a project like, all right, let's take Aquaman for example. Is there just one dialogue editor, or are there multiple ones, and you're all working together trying to piece it together? Or?
No, on that one we actually had what was unusual is we had a kind of a dialogue supervisor and an ADR supervisor. ADR being automatic dialogue replacement, when you go into the studio and you record the voices to replace either problems or to add material. Okay. So I had another gal and I were working, and we were really sort of teaming up because it was such a big, complicated show.
Right.
On Star is Born, it was much more just me doing all of it. I had help here and there for a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, but for much of the time it was just me. And
you're still recording music as Dose with Mike Watt, and also I saw that you've done a project with Devin Hoff called Awkward.
Yes, I also record in my room at 6:30 in the morning when nobody wants to record with me. I have a virtual band, and I send things out to. And like I mentioned, I work with my brother sometimes on my solo stuff that I will never release.
Oh, you never release it because you don't think you want to? Is it, or
because I don't know. It's like. The joy of it is in the creation, and not in people telling me what they think of it. Oh,
well, that makes complete sense. I totally understand that. I know you're actually at work right now, and I've taken up a lot of your time tonight. I really thank you for coming on with me. Is there anything, as a guy alone doing my own sound in my little bedroom here, talking with people over the phone, any knowledge you can impart on me who can't afford Pro Tools, on what's something I can do to make my podcast sound good?
Well, make sure you have a good mic.
Okay.
But you sound pretty good. I mean, it sounds pretty good, so that's good. And I don't have any real suggestions. I mean, I think trying to get the best recordings as you are, by finding ways of utilizing technologies,
and not skipping on equipment.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't, do you have some kind of editing tool?
I have a really old prehistoric version of Adobe Audition.
Yeah. I mean, so as long as you can do the editing you need to do. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the right tool for the right job. If you don't need Pro Tools to do what you do, then you don't need it. You don't. It's about getting nail in the wood, not in the it's just a hammer.
Yeah.
It's just a tool. Doesn't have to be a fancy hammer.
I don't need $1,000 hammer to do a
That's right.
$5 job.
That'd be like the way Watt would describe it.
Yeah.
About getting the nail in the wood.
Well, Kira, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. It's been a great...
Make me a deal. If you come up with something that you're like, oh, God, I wish I would have talked to her about this, then write to me and we'll do a quick addendum.
You got it.